Today, I am explaining the movie, The Pope Exorcist, explaining every scene as it happens. Watch till the end, and please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this. The movie starts in 1987 in Castile, Spain. Julia and her children, Amy and Henry, moved to Spain. The children weren't very excited about leaving America. They finally reached the home they would be staying in, which was still under construction. The scene shifts to a cathedral, where Father Gabriele Amorth is staring at a painting of St. Michael. Bishop Lumumba comes to stand beside him. Gabriele wonders why St. Michael didn't kill Satan when he had the chance. Lumumba speaks about how everyone will be judged and that he will defend Father Gabriele. Gabriele states that his faith doesn't need defending. Back with Julia and the kids, they are welcomed by a priest named Tomas. It turns out the house under construction belonged to her husband and had been in the family for ages. Amy is rebellious, while Henry has been mute for a year. As Henry tours the house, he hears a demonic whisper and, looking through a hole, sees the walls crack on their own. Julia meets Amy and tells her how she can handle the silent treatment from both her children. Their father is dead, and the only thing he left them is the abbey they are staying in. If they sold it, they would have enough income to return to the lives they were used to. Julia asks Amy to help watch Henry and maybe get him to talk. The scene then moves to Italy, where there is a formal hearing. The proceeding is in English, which contrasts with the Italian Gabriele is used to. In Tropea on the 4th of June, Gabriele had performed an exorcism that involved animal sacrifice, and it was done without the approval of the Reggio Calabria bishop. Gabriele states that it was not an exorcism and that the patient was just maladjusted. What the patient needed was a little conversation and theater. While exorcism was his job, this case was one of simple psychology. Lumumba was also present and spoke to the cardinals about how 98% of Gabriele's cases were followed up by a psychologist recommended by Gabriele himself. When they asked about the remaining 2%, Gabriele said that he called it evil and that it preceded science. Cardinal Sullivan acknowledged that Gabriele made a fair point, but he added that the cases Gabriele handled could have detrimental effects on the patients. Since Gabriele was not a doctor, he asked how Gabriele could explain that. Gabriele agreed that he was not a doctor or a psychologist, but he was a lawyer, a theologian, a journalist, and had served in the partisan war. He knew a firing squad when he saw one, so he asked them to get to the real reason for the meeting. Cardinal Sullivan explained that they wanted to cancel the coordination of faith validating for the Exorcist division, as it was such an old practice. Gabriele responded that if the coordination of faith thought evil was non-existent, then there wasn't a need for the church either. He gulped his espresso and set to leave. Cardinal Sullivan thought his behavior was rude, but Gabriele explained that he was the chief exorcist of the Vatican, and his diocese and local bishop were the Pope. If they had something to say, they should speak to his boss. He didn't wait to hear more before leaving. Back at the abbey, a construction worker suddenly hurt himself after finding something weird, so they pulled their crews from working there. Henry started behaving strangely, exclaiming that they were all going to die and clawing at himself. He was taken to the hospital, but they couldn't find anything wrong with him. There was another strange event, and Henry, speaking in a demonic voice, demanded that the priest be brought to him. When Tomas, who had welcomed them to the abbey, was brought in, he was thrown off guard by an unknown force. Henry, still speaking in the demonic voice, remarked that Tomas was the wrong priest. Gabriele met with the Pope, who had been reported as infirm, but the Pope denied it. The Pope spoke about how the younger generation, like Cardinal Sullivan, believed the devil was just an idea or a fairy tale, but they knew better. He praised Gabriele's work but advised him to be more humble. Gabriele joked, denying he was ever proud. The Pope then mentioned a case in Spain involving a boy who needed an exorcism, warning Gabriele to be careful because this particular demon gave him a bad feeling. Gabriele nodded and reviewed the file before setting off on his journey. He arrived at the abbey and was welcomed by the priest. He was introduced to Julia, who wasn't very impressed that the church had sent someone. She just wanted her son back. Gabriele was confident he would be given a chance, so they allowed it. He went to Henry's room upstairs, where the boy seemed to be taking a nap. Gabriele sat down on a chair and started reciting his Our Father prayers. Henry woke up and said in a demonic voice that prayers wouldn't work here. Gabriele held out a calligraphed object and asked the demon to say its name. The demon replied that he was a nightmare and blasphemy and that he knew all of Gabriele's sins. It even called Gabriele by name, which shocked him. A memory of young Gabriele at war popped up in his head as Henry, speaking in that demonic voice, continued to taunt him. The demon told Gabriele that he hadn't forgiven himself for his sins, so how could anyone else forgive him? Henry then puked out a bloody chick from his throat. Gabriele quickly left the room and met with Tomas, asking if he had mentioned his name to anyone in the house. Tomas wasn't sure he had. Gabriele added that he needed to speak with Julia because the demon in Henry was high in the hierarchy, indicating something was seriously wrong. When he met with Julia, he asked if Henry had experienced any recent trauma. Julia explained that Henry had witnessed his father's death in an accident. He saw the impaled body and hadn't spoken a word since. Gabriele stated that such trauma could be a gateway for demons, and the only way to bring Henry back was through faith. He urged Julia to believe and pray. While they were still talking, Amy came running in fear. She had received a strange call from her dead dad. The voice on the other end initially sounded like her dad's, but then switched to a demonic voice, saying they would all die. Gabriele quickly set to work. He told Tomas to confess his sins, but due to limited time, he didn't listen to any details of Tomas's escapades, and just prayed for his forgiveness. Gabriele also instructed Tomas not to react to the demon but only to pray. Tomas knew nothing about exorcism, but they didn't know how long the process would take. The key was to find the demon's real name and exorcise it. They went to Henry's room, and the demon taunted Gabriele for running off like a coward. It said it was going to torment Gabriele, making him hate the release he would feel. Gabriele didn't react and began praying with Tomas. There was a power outage, and when Gabriele turned on his lighter, he saw a woman he recognized as Rosalia. Rosalia accused Gabriele of being unable to forgive himself because he didn't help her. She asked why he didn't believe her at first. Gabriele screamed that it was a deceiver, and everything returned to normal with Henry struggling on the bed. Henry turned to Tomas and taunted him, calling him a panty sniffer and bringing up his escapade with a girl named Adela. Enraged, Tomas tried to strangle Henry, but Gabriele intervened, and Tomas stormed out angrily. Before Gabriele could leave, Henry, in the usual demonic voice, said he had been used as bait and had fooled them all. Gabriele met with Tomas, who confessed that Adela was his first love, but his love for the priesthood was stronger. Gabriele prayed for him and asked that he live in eternal life. Tomas also asked about Rosalia, and Gabriele explained that she was someone he was supposed to help. He added that the demon could smell guilt and use it against them. Remembering the demon's words about bait, Gabriele realized he had to check the garden. This was part of a bigger plan, not just about the boy. Tomas was praying in front of Henry's room when he heard Henry's voice calling for help. When he went in, Henry bit his ear and told him no one was leaving the abbey alive. Meanwhile, Gabriele found a deep well in the garden and investigated it. When he returned inside, he found Tomas groaning in pain from the bite. They also heard screams from Julia and Amy and spread out to help. Amy was being thrown around by an invisible force, while Julia was being suffocated by an arm. They managed to get both Julia and Amy out, with Gabriele praying mostly in Latin. Amy and Julia fell asleep together, while Tomas and Gabriele kept watch. Gabriele explained that the devil was doing all this as a distraction. He then took Tomas to the well where he had found something disturbing: dead bodies of people who didn't convert. Gabriele stated there was something more down there, and they had to investigate further. Meanwhile, the Pope continued his investigation. In the abbey's files, he found a hidden note stating the unsafe conditions of the abbey. Suddenly, the Pope had an attack with Gabriele's name on the tip of his tongue. Gabriele and Tomas went through the basement and found a door. They saw the body of a notable church founder locked in a tomb, possibly protecting something from getting out. When they couldn't find a way to open another door, Gabriele searched the body of the notable figure and found a key in his stomach. Luckily, it granted them access to the door. The first thing they saw was the body of the first exorcist and his journal. Gabriele picked it up and read about how the exorcist had encountered a case of a monk being possessed. When they asked for the demon's name, it spoke from another's mouth, and then a third. It was a case of multiple possessions. At the hospital, the Pope tried to convey a message to be told to Gabriele but couldn't and puked blood. Julia woke up and didn't find Amy beside her, so she set out to find her. Julia hid a syringe with sedatives behind her arm. She found Amy and Henry, and they were both mouthing the same thing. Gabriele realized that the exorcist had been possessed for a long time, infiltrating the church. This was the demon's goal. Tomas remembered the demon's first words to him. It had asked for the priest, but it wasn't him. The demon fed on exorcists, and was trying to raise an army of demons buried underneath to infiltrate the church. They also figured out the demon's name, Asmodeus. Now, the only thing that could defeat them was their sins. Julia pulled Amy, which seemed to clear her eyes. They managed to sedate Henry and tie him up. Gabriele decided it was time to free himself of his burden by making a confession. He talked about his time in the partisan war, how everyone he knew died, and that since he survived, he thought his life had a purpose. He decided to serve God and became an exorcist. Then he was brought to Rosalia, who spoke about how the devil had tormented her. When he asked her to describe the devil, she said it was him. He didn't believe her. He thought she had a mental problem. It wasn't until she committed suicide that Gabriele realized she had been abused by someone from the church, and he had ignored the signs. Tomas prayed for him. They returned to the main house, and Gabriele fortified all of them. To defeat the devil, they needed to be protected by the armor of God. Suddenly, there was a rumble in the sky, startling all of them. All four of them went to Henry's room, where he was tied up. They started the prayers, but soon enough, Gabriele saw Rosalia and got distracted until Tomas called out to him. They continued the exorcism, but Asmodeus sought only for Gabriele to let him in. It seemed as if the real Henry was back for a moment, and when they checked his stomach, the sentence, "God is not here," was etched on his skin. They turned and realized that Amy was possessed too. Amy started strangling her mom, and Tomas was being strangled by his own clothes. Gabriele was possessed by Asmodeus, but before it could take full control, he asked Tomas to take the family and get out. Julia and her children were able to run away in their car while Tomas set out to find Gabriele. He found him sitting on a throne. Tomas prayed and asked Gabriele to fight it, and surprisingly he did. Asmodeus appeared in the form of Rosalia and Adela to drag them both to hell, but they managed to fight it off. Tomas even learned a prayer in Latin. They visited the Pope, who commended their efforts. Surprisingly, Cardinal Sullivan had left his position, and it was given to Lumumba. Lumumba asked Gabriele to take on the role of finding the rest of the 199 demons because Asmodeus wasn't the only one. Gabriele agreed only if Tomas joined him in the quest. Tomas accepted. It was also mentioned that Julia and her children were settling in the U.S. Father Gabriele Amorth died in 2016 after serving God and writing many good books.